This episode is brought to you by my Fertility Awareness Mastery online self-study program. Learn fertility awareness from the comfort of your own home at your own pace for a fraction of the cost. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/mastery for details. That's fertilityfriday.com/mastery. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 367. Welcome to the Fertility Friday podcast, your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm your host, Lisa Hendrickson-Jack. I'm the author of The Fifth Vital Sign and the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Journal. I'm a certified fertility awareness educator and holistic reproductive health practitioner with nearly 20 years of experience teaching women to connect to their fifth vital sign through menstrual cycle charting, balancing hormonal health, and optimizing the menstrual cycle without hormones. I'm outspoken about hormonal birth control and its impact on fertility and overall health because you have the right to know how your body works and how artificial hormones disrupt that natural process. I host live coaching programs to help you achieve optimal fertility and health because it's important to have healthy menstrual cycles regardless of whether or not you want to have babies. I'm also a wife and mother of two beautiful boys. I know, I'm a busy girl, but I managed to fit it all in. This podcast is designed to empower you to take full control of your cycles, your fertility, and your overall health. And I'm so excited that you're here with us today. Today, I'm sharing a brand new episode in my Fertility Awareness reality series. I'm sharing my interview with Brittany, a member of my recent Fertility Awareness Mastery Live group coaching program. And we are talking about her experience transitioning to fertility awareness as her primary birth control method. These episodes are some of my favorite because they give you some insight into what it's really like when you're trying to learn fertility awareness. What are some of the real challenges that women are actually facing? And also, especially if you're new to the podcast or if fertility awareness is a new concept for you, it also hopefully gives you some confidence to know that A, you're not alone, even though it might feel like it in your current circle. There are plenty of women who are doing this. It is possible to learn. It's possible to do and to use well. And certainly also if you have cycle challenges, it is possible to heal and repair your periods and your cycles. And I think that is the other side of the conversation that we don't always get when we're seeing our conventional healthcare practitioners. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and jump into today's episode. And I'm excited to be here today with Brittany. Brittany was a member of my most recent Fertility Awareness Mastery Live program. And we're actually recording this about a month after the program. So this is a great opportunity for us to check in to see how everything's going. So welcome to the show, Brittany.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. It's always a little weird because it's like a private conversation because it's just you and me, but it's like a private public conversation as well for the couple thousand of our closest friends.
Yes, of course.
But I would love to start just by giving you an opportunity to share a little bit about your birth control history with the audience. And so let us know how old you were when you had your first period and kind of how that all went. And if you've ever used birth control before and kind of how you've managed your fertility up to this point.
Okay. Well, I started my period when I was 14. So a little bit later. I was a freshman in high school and all my other girlfriends were like, oh my gosh, you haven't started yet? You're so lucky. It was actually New Year's Day when I was a freshman, second semester.
Happy New Year.
And I don't ever remember having very many problems. The only times I ever had any sort of pain associated with my period was when I would go to church camps and there would be a whole bunch of other girls. For some reason, I would get cramps on those trips. But my other times when I was just living my normal life, I don't remember having cramps or anything like that. I actually have never been on birth control, hormonal birth control. I got married when I was 21 years old. And obviously we wanted, to have some sort of contraceptive, but for moral reasons, I really wanted to avoid hormonal birth control I covered all my bases. I did all the research because hormonal birth control, one of the things it does is it weakens the lining of the uterus, the endometrium. if by chance the ovulation suppression doesn't occur, then that would be what we call abortifacient. And so, the baby would be there, but then it wouldn't be able to implant. I felt like that was a moral problem for me. So anything that makes it to where a fetus can't implant is problematic in terms of birth control. And my husband has, been really helpful and supportive in terms of that aspect of it. But he did want us to have something. And so we've done mostly barrier methods and stuff. Yeah, that's kind of where we are. Actually, around the time I was getting married, I had a friend recommend to me Toni Weschler's book. I think I said her name right, Taking Charge of Your Fertility. And I read it and I was like, this is great. It'll be fantastic. In her book, she tells a story about like when a wife gets up in the morning and her husband wakes up, he just kind of pokes the thermometer in her mouth and she doesn't even have to wake up really. And I told my husband, he's like, yeah, no, this is your thing. So it's really been like a personal journey kind of learning about fertility tracking and stuff. But the book, while it was helpful in explaining, it wasn't helpful in really like getting down to brass tacks about like, this looks like, obviously I didn't have a chat with Toni Weschler, anything like that. And so that's kind of why I started looking into your client class. So that's how I got here.
Well, thanks for taking us through that. I think that it is kind of important to recognize all the different reasons why women choose the different birth control methods that they do. I think there are a lot of women, of course, who are concerned about the possibility that their birth control method could actually be preventing implantation in the event that you do have a fertilized egg. And so I think it's important to kind of recognize those things. And that's why I always say, like, there's no one method of birth control for all women and for all couples, because there's so many differences between us in all kinds of areas. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because for some, they may not consider that, or it's not necessarily an issue for them. But for others, that could also come into play, for example, with the IUD, whereas like the copper IUD could potentially allow for the fertilization of the egg, but just interfere with implantation. So there's so many different reasons why we choose it. And I also wanted to touch on what you mentioned with Toni Weschler's book and giving the example of the husband or the partner coming in with the thermometer. And so that's something I like to talk about as well, because I think it's really important, again, to point out that everyone does this differently. And the degree to which your partner participates in fertility awareness charting is highly variable. So I wouldn't want you to think like, oh, my partner is not participating, like that makes us a weird couple. No, it doesn't. In the episode that I did at the beginning of the year, so I don't have the number off the top of my head, but it was, I think, the last episode of 2020, I shared a conversation with my husband on air. And he doesn't hold my thermometer or help me chart. He basically, I just give him the heads up, like, do you want a baby today or not? And so just to kind of affirm that, because I've also worked with a number of women whose partners actively participate. They're writing everything on the chart. I actually just had a session for my FAM class where our guest speaker shared about a couple. And again, it was the same kind of thing. Like, I think they may have even been like distance at times, and he would literally like record into her app.
That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's not my life, and it's not yours.
No.
And that's okay.
No. Yeah. And there are some times when like, I wish that I could get some involvement, because when it comes to being intimate, as husband and wife and all of that, especially with using barrier methods, because right now, we're using like a cervical cap, and they call it diaphragm gel because spermicide is not okay anymore. And like all of that falls on me. Yeah. That's my responsibility, And so like, it would be nice to kind of get, like divided 50-50 sort of things. At least we still have ways that we can be intimate when, we have these moral sort of restrictions, but also we don't want to be having babies all the time. Like, so it is nice that the more the more you're able to really be in control of things.
Yeah. And it's a challenging situation. And this is one of the huge, just general critiques about birth control as a concept, because for men, the options are condoms, withdrawal, vasectomy. Am I missing anything?
Nope.
I feel like those are the options, really.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it is kind of obviously not 50-50 for a lot of people, although it is for some. It really just depends. Potentially in that situation, it's worthy of having some conversations about how things can be balanced in other areas and, all of that good stuff in relationships.
Yeah. And the other thing that I thought I would mention, I know we don't like to talk about how physicians are bad, because they're not. When I was trying to learn about different birth control methods, I did have a nurse practitioner tell me that none of the birth control methods were, I said the word abortifacient, like they didn't prevent implantation. Like that wasn't, what they did. And so like, just, it was really hard to hear that and then go do the research for myself and be like, I mean, my physician just like kind of lied to me, like it was almost like she just was like, no, like you're just being silly. Like just go ahead and do it. Like there was no desire for education or anything. It was just like, don't worry about that. Like, you know what I mean? And it was really frustrating. And so that's another aspect of sort of my journey of how I landed where I am in birth control. So.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm sorry to hear that, because ultimately when you're asking questions about what I would just term the mode of action of a birth control method, really our personal beliefs and kind of politics shouldn't get like it's biology. So we should be able to talk about the biology. So as you know, there's a lot of different opinions about this. And so of course there's going to be people for whom their moral situation is a bit different. And so they might think, oh, it's silly to even think that way. But that doesn't change biology. And so like the quick and dirty review of the mode of action of most hormonal contraceptives is that the primary mode of action is to prevent ovulation. So it's not obviously to say that it always is going to prevent implantation, because that actually is not the primary. However, the secondary mode of action, there are two. And so one is to block the cervix with a thick mucus plug. So that's under the influence of the artificial hormones. And of course, the other is to thin the uterine lining and make it not receptive to a fertilized egg. So the abortifacient possibility is not the primary, but it is one of the ways that it works to prevent pregnancy. And so particularly the progesterone-only pill formations, they do not always prevent ovulation. So they sometimes do. And for a good percentage of women actually keep ovulating when they're using progestin-only methods, like the progestin-only IUD and things like that. So for the progestin-only methods, particularly the IUD and in some cases the pill, it's kind of the primary mode of action to actually make the uterine lining not receptive to a fertilized egg. So again, this is biology. And so I believe in informed consent. So if we provide the information, then as a client, you get to take that information and decide what's going to work for you and your partner.
Yeah.
So that's unfortunate. And I think it's a good message for everyone listening that unfortunately we live in an age where it kind of is like this sometimes, where the opinions of your practitioner are going to determine what information they'll provide. And so some practitioners may provide information about fertility awareness-based methods, while many, if not most, wouldn't, or would very likely downplay their potential effectiveness. And it's not because the method itself isn't effective, it's more so because they're not educated about it.
Yeah.
To be able to provide you with accurate information.
Yeah.
So with that said, let's jump into the session part of our session then. Yeah. So since it's, as I mentioned, it's been about a month since we saw each other, and I'm just going to pull up your charts here.
Sure.
Which of course listeners can't see. But yeah, so let me know kind of where you're at with everything, and also kind of what your top questions are today or any challenges you've been having.
Well, the first thing that I would tell anyone who's thinking about taking your class, and here's just a free promo, but is the differentiation in the types of cervical mucus. Like I said, I read Tony Weschler's book. I actually lost my copy pretty soon after I got married. I don't know. I have no idea what happened to it. And so, I knew that, you were supposed to sort of track cervical mucus, but I maybe just assumed it was like quantity, like the more you had, like the closer you were to ovulation or something. And now that I've taken your class, I am well aware that it is not that simple. Like, that's probably my biggest question. If you looked at the chart that I sent you for this most recent cycle that I started on the 24th of March, you can kind of see like I have a few days of like red flow, and then like my first day where I didn't have a period, I had what looked like peak mucus, and I know that I had that problem like when I was in the class, and we talked about it a little bit, but it's just like there's so much of the really stretchy sort of stuff that I just like, I feel like a freak of nature sometimes. And I know it's, different women have different bodies and different normals and stuff, but just going straight from period to like the stuff that like hangs from you while you're using the bathroom. TMI, sorry, should have said it before.
Well, you're on the TMI podcast, FYI.
Yes,
I should have just named it that as opposed to Fertility Friday.
But like it's really confusing sometimes, especially when it's like a couple of days of the 10C and then like you go back down to like 4 or 6 or something, and so I'm just, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this is something that we had talked about. So for the listeners, one of the patterns that Brittany is seeing is kind of a longer mucus phase. So like if I look at a couple of charts ago here, you had mucus for so like 9 days leading up to ovulation and kind of in and out. We talked about some of the reasons why that might be. So I think we went through a few different things, a few different strategies in terms of supporting cervical health and things like that. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we identified during our work together was kind of like the stress management, sleep patterns, and certainly I think I told you to eat breakfast or something like that. So we were looking at some of those basic lifestyle factors.
Yeah.
In terms of charting, for the practical aspect of charting, I think that obviously this makes it challenging because it means that you have fewer days that are available for unprotected sex in the post-ovulatory phase. So in terms of how to manage this, I would say, first and foremost, the way that I've been talking about managing the fertile window in the pre-ovulatory phase, when we were in the class together, first, what I try to do is kind of reset the expectation of what this really looks like. So if we think about, so your cycles are, let me see here.
I was actually surprised when I started charting that like they've been 27, 28 days before I had my children. So I have 2 kids. I didn't say that. But before I had my children, like they would be all over the place. They would be like down to 24, up to 35. Like, there were a couple of times where I thought I was pregnant because my cycle had been like 6 weeks long. And I don't know whether it was just like really weird hormones or whether I actually had like a really early miscarriage or whatever. But after I had my first child, my son, they did sort of like even out. That pattern continued after I had like my second baby, which was really encouraging. Pregnancy can sort of help to like level some of the hormones sometimes. But yeah, I was pretty surprised to see that they're like actually, following the length of time that everyone says they should, because I was not expecting that at all. I was expecting they would be all over the place. So. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's certainly a good thing for a couple of reasons. One, it means that the cycles are falling into a normal range, which is a good sign that you have, normal ovulatory function and that type of thing. You can chart your cycles whether or not your cycles are always very consistent, but certainly it is helpful for a number of reasons. And I just wanted to make a comment about what you said with charting now. If you did become pregnant and have an early miscarriage, you would notice. Like, there's no way that you wouldn't know that now.
Yeah.
It would just be so obvious to have, obviously, a longer luteal phase, a longer period of time of having the high temperatures. You'd know right away, and you would probably do that pregnancy test right away if that did occur. So that's obviously one of the benefits. And that goes in line with the point that I was going to make about like what this really looks like when you have relatively consistent cycles. So if your cycles are averaging about 29 days, let's just give that as an example, and ovulation is happening somewhere in there. It could be happening somewhere between days 14 and days 18, let's say, for example, or something like that, but pretty consistent in a 29-day cycle. So with that in mind, we can break the cycle in half, right? The pre-ov and the post-ov, but we could break the pre-ovulatory phase into infertile, kind of pre-ovulatory infertile days and the fertile days. So with that said, I think that what I've observed is that when we're coming into fertility awareness and we're excited about it, I think we overestimate the amount of potentially infertile days in the pre-ovulatory phase. So if we have, like I said, just 28-day cycle, we'll just go with the average here. And if you're ovulating like somewhere between days 15 and 18, you really don't have like a week or two of infertile days before your window. So at most, if your cycles are averaging around 29 days, the first 7 days, the first 6 to 7 days of your cycle, depending on your mucus patterns, would kind of be the only window where there could be unprotected sex. And if your period is 5 days long, for example, I know yours, it looks like it's, between 3 days and maybe sometimes 4, but if for the average woman, if her period is about 5 days, that is 5 of the first 7 days. Yeah. So it's kind of disappointing, I think, for some women when they're discovering fertility awareness, but it means that like your period is included. And so there's a lot less potentially infertile days than you thought.
And what I like about fertility awareness is, and your class really helped me to see this, is that it's all about like data collection, analyzing data. It's not about like predicting like I'm going to ovulate on this day of the month. Like you can go back and you can say, I've ovulated on day 13 or day 15 for the past 6 cycles, but that doesn't mean that this cycle you're going to ovulate on day 15. You are really hammering that home. It's not about like predicting what's coming. It's about knowing when things are out of the ordinary. And it really kind of goes along with like your book. The whole point of it's the 5th vital sign. So it's not about, like I said, it's not about predicting when, you'll be able to ovulate or when you'll be able to, have unprotected sex, but it's about knowing like, okay, so something is different. Is there something wrong? It's really important to be able to figure that out.
Mm-hmm. Well, and in terms of, practical management for you, I would say we started in January together.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then now as we're recording this, it's the beginning of April.
Yes.
And so I do think that it is helpful to kind of keep, like I said, I'm acknowledging the frustration because obviously you haven't been able to utilize many of your pre-ovulatory days, because if you see clear stretchy mucus, or not clear, but if you see cervical fluid in those early days, you do have to consider those days fertile. And so in your case, it does mean that at least for the moment, until we kind of sort that out, for many of these cycles, there just aren't very many days in the pre-ovulatory phase.
Yeah.
And so this, it just depends on how you look at it. Certainly this is one of the challenges, or you could say kind of criticisms of the of fertility awareness based methods as a concept, because there are times, like it also applies to my women in the PCOS category, because I've had a number of clients who either have like lots and lots of days of like a little bit of peak. So every day they see a little bit of clear stretchy mucus, or they'll have multiple patches of it. So then you have sometimes like 20 days where you're seeing all this mucus and in the pre-op before ovulation, because ovulation would be delayed for a lot of women with uncontrolled PCOS. So you end up having to use protection a whole lot until you can confirm ovulation and you utilize the post-ovulatory infertile phase. So we can acknowledge that. But in terms of pregnancy prevention, like what is the strategy here? So I would certainly look at all the different handouts that we talked about. I'll send you some of them so that you can kind of go through them. But we talked about the day 6 rule, I believe. And so the 6-day rule, meaning at least for right now, from day 7 forward, I would just consider that fertile for the pre-ovulatory phase. And then once you've identified your kind of patterns of ovulation, as we talked about, then you can kind of start moving forward. So there's a number of different symptothermal specific strategies that we've talked about in class. One is called the 6-day rule. Another is called the Doring rule. And so these are ways that we can manage the pre-ovulatory phase by identifying a last pre-ovulatory infertile day, so that there's more structure as to how we're identifying the infertile days in addition to cervical mucus. And so in your case, it definitely does apply.
Well, and the other thing I noticed on the most recent one that I just sent you was, so I have a couple of days like right after my period that are listed as 10C. And then like the last 4 days before yesterday, no, before yesterday, were 10K. And they actually, like, the two different types, even though they both were stretchy, like they're pretty different. Just like the way that they look and stuff. Like the 10K that I wrote down, none of that was ever like stretchy to the point where it was just hanging down into the toilet. Like it was all like stretchy on the toilet paper, and obviously like it was clear and not cloudy and stuff. And so I imagine it'll probably just take a lot more observation. But like, I'm not saying, like I can tell the difference between stretchy not peak mucus and stretchy peak mucus. Like that's not what I'm saying, but I'm wondering if there's like a way to identify like, okay, this type of mucus occurs outside my ovulatory window, under these conditions. Like you said, maybe I'm not eating the right sort of things, or I'm not getting enough sleep or something. And I don't know why my body would be like, not enough sleep, let's have a baby. But there you go.
Yes. Well, so to kind of touch on one of the things that you said, so some women do notice outside of their fertile window kind of like a basic pattern of mucus. And so we call that the basic infertile pattern. Most of the time that's dry, but in some women, they'll have mucus in that way. So from the previous charts, you did have, so from what I have here, you did have primarily in the pre-ovulatory phase, days of mucus. And of course, some days it was like white in color and stretchy, and other days it was clear in color and stretchy. What I didn't necessarily see consistently, and this could also just be because we didn't necessarily have the full information. What I don't have, I suppose, I don't have enough information to identify if you're continuing to see that similar kind of mucus pattern in the post-ovulatory phase as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's different ways that it can show up, but I've certainly seen women who have kind of like the lotiony mucus all the time. Like they have it before they go into their fertile window, and then after they ovulate, they continue to have it in the post-ovulatory phase. So there are certain cases where if there is a pattern that we can identify where you are showing a consistent mucus pattern, but it's different to what you see in the fertile window, that is a case where we can work together and actually identify. We would denote those with yellow stamps. We call it yellow stamp management. In your case, I would say we would need at least one or two more charts to gather that information in order to see if it applies to your situation. And then if it did, then we want to the key is in those situations, when you go into the fertile window, the mucus pattern that you see is it's different, it's obvious when that's actually the issue. And so, yes, it is possible to notate the different, like that's more of an advanced situation.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if that is necessarily the case. I'd have to look at the post-ovulatory patterns to see if we're seeing kind of like a similar thing. But you are already starting to notice kind of a difference there.
Yeah. Well, and I was thinking about it, like when I was noting like, oh, well, this is different, than the stretchy I was having earlier. I was like, what would be really nice? Just like an app that you're supposed to pull up every time you go to the bathroom. And it has literally like a picture of literally every different type of mucus, and then you just like pick all the ones that apply.
Yes.
And it's just like just for data collection, like maybe it doesn't sit there and be like, well, that means it's 8K or whatever. It doesn't have to do that, but it's just like just to like document, like it looked like this, it looked like this.
Yes, I'm sure someone is working on that right now.
Yes. Well, if I feel
like there might be a website. I feel like there might be a website. I feel like there's enough women that are charting. Now I'd have to look it up but I feel like vaguely somewhere in my memory that there is like a website where like women have submitted multiple pictures of mucus and just put it up.
Well, so I'm sure that you have plenty. Like yes and no.
I
know you wouldn't send like the pictures that women have sent you, but I'm sure you have quite a collection.
Yeah, I do have a folder, but I think that one of the differences is because we use because I teach a mucus charting system, like the books that I shared. So like the guide that I sent you in the mail has some picture, obviously doesn't have every possible, image under the sun. Because of the classification system, really we're looking at the color, how much it stretches, and the quality, like if it's gummy versus if it's just stretchy versus if it's kind of pasty. Yeah. So it's a little bit different in that respect because you can at least classify it. And then the concerning kind of types are if you're seeing yellow or if you're seeing gummy, where it's actually kind of either forming into a ball or like gum where it's kind of hard to stretch.
Yeah.
So with that said, when we had our sessions together, I think the main concern that I had was just about the stress management and like how you were sleeping and things like that. From what I remember, you just had a really taxing schedule. So it was because not like you had anything to do. Like you're only a mom of two and you work full time and
have a
right.
job.
Like you don't really have any responsibilities or anything.
Yeah.
So from what I remember, one of the challenges was that often, obviously with all the responsibilities, you'd be going to bed maybe after 11 o'clock, maybe 12, and then you would be waking up at like 5. And so I know that was one of the, obviously that's hard to maintain, but somehow you were doing it.
Yeah. I still am not sure like how my body is just like, okay, we'll get along. I mean, because I hear so many people that are like, if I have less than 7 hours of sleep, like I can't function. And I'm like, sometimes I feel like I don't have options. I mean, like really it's just like get up and get along and do what you have to do sort of things. And I have gotten a little better. I have gotten to where I'm just like, look, right now I am going to take a nap because I'm really tired. I mean, last night I had a really awful headache. And so I went to bed at like 9 o'clock.
That's amazing.
So that was nice. Yeah. And then in terms of like eating and stuff as well, I'm trying to like not feel guilty taking time off of what I feel like I'm supposed to be doing to like eat food and things like that. I mean, and I know like when you say it out loud like that, it makes so much sense. But it's just like this mindset of, taking care of other people and making sure that you're not letting people down. Sometimes it's hard to get past. So
I wanted to pop in with a quick message from today's sponsor, Audible. Did you know that you can listen to The Fifth Vital Sign for free when you sign up for a 30-day trial with Audible? Head over to fertilityfriday.com/audible for details. That's fertilityfriday.com/audible. Now let's jump back into today's episode. Yeah. And I mean, I can relate. I'm not standing here on this podcast. Like I have this perfect life and every single night I go to bed at 9:30 and like, so that's not what I'm saying. Certainly going to bed early is one of the things that I've struggled with. If you talk to my husband, he would say like, there's something wrong with her. But I always say like when I come from a family of night owls. So one of my personal challenges also is to prioritize myself and basically just stop. So 10 o'clock rolls around, I just have to stop and like go and sit in my bed and start to kind of maybe read and relax and like go to sleep. And I certainly function a lot better when I go to bed before 11 o'clock. So by no means am I saying that this is easy. I also have 2 little ones, age 5 and 8, and all kinds of things going on. But one of the things that we talked about in the class is certainly you're having this challenge with the mucus patterns. And I think I know in some of our previous sessions in class, you had concerns about some of the mucus that you were seeing kind of post-ovulatory, because you'd have it like a couple of days here and there or things like that. And ultimately, certainly if you're seeing mucus patterns that are concerning or different things, like if you are seeing some of those like signs, like if the mucus is yellow or gummy or something, absolutely go to your doctor, get a swab, have them do a culture, have them test you for all those things. Like it's just general maintenance. We should all get those general checkups done if we have any concerns. But before we jump to conclusions about all these things, I do, and I said this in class, I think, but I just want to encourage you to kind of reflect on those things. It is not sustainable to, this is like when the tone comes in, like the kind of like motherly, but it's not sustainable to have 5 hours of sleep a night. You can keep it up for a little while. But you're a bit younger than me. So I'm turning 39 this year. So I'm like moving up into the next stage of my reproductive life. And what I can tell you is by the time you reach to my age, there's a lot less give. So we can get away with these things a lot in our 20s, a little bit less in our 30s, but we can still get away with it to some extent, like in our early 30s. But this is actually a blessing that you're charting at this stage, because it's going to help you to start to see like the limits of your body. Like charting helps you to see how far you can push yourself. Because once you kind of get into a good groove and your cycles start to fall into those healthy patterns, like you're noticing the consistent 29-day kind of averaging, you might notice that if you have like a super stressful month, or if you kind of fall off the wagon with the sleeping or the eating or whatever, that you see a change. And so it kind of helps you over the years to get into a good groove. And it's good practice, because when you get into the late 30s, what I'm finding with myself and also with my clients in that age category is that we just can't get away with it anymore. When you were saying like, I just seem to be able to get up and do it. A lot of women who can just get up and do it, they're powered by coffee. Like they're powered by, there's reasons why they can get out of bed, and it becomes a crutch. And when that happens, your hormones can't stay balanced.
Yeah.
So, but I think that you've made a lot of positive changes. I feel like you've done a ton. And so, yeah, I mean,
I have some liver in my freezer.
Wow, that's amazing.
I know. I need to get it out and thaw it so I can, because I don't think I'll convince my family to eat it. So I'm just like, I just make it into like you said, like a pate, and just like a couple of crackers with it every day or something. But yeah. I keep forgetting to take it out of the freezer. Maybe I'll go do that after we get off this call.
Excellent. And there's the hidden liver strategy, because if you make all the meals, you can pate it. So you can make a wonderful pate, put it in an ice cube tray. And then if you're making soup or anything that has ground meat of any kind, hidden liver.
There we go.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I know you mentioned was that since the class stopped about a month ago, you found it maybe a bit challenging to stay consistent with charting. I think you mentioned more specifically in the post-ovulatory phase. So did you want to talk a little bit about that?
I mean, I can. It's like, and I know that, like I said, the fertility charting is about data collection. The idea that cycle is, a vital sign. First of all, that like your medical professionals may not actually be interested in keeping track of, but also it's something that we can take control of. If we can, we have, charts, we can do all of that, and so like one of the things that I've been pretty worried about is just like this, the feeling of like overwhelm. Like I forget things all the time. I forget words and stuff. And so I've been trying to keep track of that along with the chart and everything. But there's something about the post-ovulatory phase, like the hormones and everything, like everything is just a little bit harder, a little bit more like slogging through cement rather than like running on a track. And so I think that it feels to me like it's not that I wasn't like paying attention in the moment. It's just that I was like, it's too much work to like write it down and stuff. And I think part of it might've been that I like rearranged furniture in the book. Literally the book got closed. And so I was not able to just like pick up a pencil and like write it down, which feels so dumb. But at the same time, like when you're like on this knife edge of I've got so much to do, like finding the spot where you were in the book and writing down, the last 3 days temperatures is just like, I've got better things that I can do right now than spend 15 minutes trying to remember like the right order and stuff. It's just, and so I think that's probably what happened, is just that it got to be like too much and overwhelming sort of thing.
Well, yeah. First of all, I just want to say that like what you're experiencing is really common. And I think most of the listeners have probably experienced that at some point or another, those who are actively charting, where a couple of days goes by and you just kind of like, slips your mind. And so a couple of things, I think, just some strategies to share from a practical standpoint. I think the first thing is to recognize that you're a human being and this is going to happen. And I think the most important thing is to recognize that and to not get discouraged. So this is why particularly, this is what we're talking about is kind of like dropping off after the post-ovulatory phase, or after in the post-ovulatory phase, I should say. So I think first and foremost, when you're using the method for birth control, know what to do when in doubt or when you miss an observation. So if you're in the pre-ovulatory phase and you miss an observation, you need to consider yourself fertile and 3 days after as a, measure. A comment that I wanted to make about kind of like the pre versus the post-ovulatory is that, of course, I see it very commonly when I'm working with clients that, of course, like the pre-ovulatory phase is the only part. So it's the only part of the cycle where pregnancy can happen. So pregnancy can't happen in the post-ovulatory phase, period. Once you've confirmed ovulation and if you've done your cross-check, if you're using a cross-check method. So like can't happen, impossible. We could talk about why there's no egg, like all of those things. But the pre-ovulatory phase, yes, like that's the only part where it can happen. So then it makes sense from a logical perspective that many women who chart are much more, obviously, like it's much more like concerned during that time. So I've seen it many, many times where we're totally on top of the charting. All the notations are there. Everything is marked. And then once ovulation happens and you've confirmed it with the temperatures and the mucus, that you kind of like, meh. And so just to put that out there, I mean, that's not an uncommon thing and it makes sense. Of course, when we're in class together, I'm going to encourage you to track all throughout the cycle because you're there when you're taking the class, like you're there for the birth control, but you're also there for kind of the cycle monitoring, things like that. Technically speaking, you know, whether you have a dry day or like it's shiny after you've confirmed ovulation is not relevant for the purposes of birth control, right? That's more fifth vital sign tracking when we're looking at those specific details.
Let me see if I remember, because so last month I stopped charting on day 14 and it doesn't look like I had recorded a really solid thermal shift yet. So I might not have ovulated until day 20, which means that I would have had a shorter luteal phase. And that could indicate like some sort of health problem that I missed. Like,
I wouldn't jump to all of, like, I really wouldn't take it all that far in this particular chart, because since you didn't chart that specifically, you don't know. So you can't just assume
like that, well,
that you have a health problem.
You know, that's the point is, you know, without collecting that data, like we don't know, you know.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's the value of collecting the data is really what it is, you know, and so.
Well, so that I just wanted to kind of make that comment just so that you can kind of, so if you are having that difficulty, you could kind of take advantage of the pre-ovulatory motivation. And you could even have a conversation with your partner, like, I'm going to tell you when I've confirmed ovulation, right? Or like when I've done the cross checks. You could kind of make it, try to give you, it's like tricking yourself into giving yourself that motivation during that time, just at least to get to the point that you've confirmed it. So a couple other things. I mean, one, in terms of practicality, just think about what could work for you, what could help to make this process easier. Is there somewhere you could put the book? Can you put it in the bathroom? Can you put it beside the bed? Always having it open to the page and having your pencil or your crayons with you. Would it be more useful for you to use an app? So I've been recommending the Read Your Body app. And so all of my clients are different. Obviously, some really love having the book, the charting workbook, and obviously some really like having the app. So is it easier for you to have, because I mean, unless if you're not addicted to your phone, then somehow you managed to escape it. Most of us are.
Yeah, I'm there. I'm with you. Yeah.
So if it's easier for you to use the Read Your Body app, and because it's always there, we always have our phones. And then also, is there like a mental note you could put in your mind, like before bed, I'm going to do this, or when I brush my teeth, I'm going to do this, or attach it to another habit that you're doing. And again, it's not about being perfect. For like have a plan ahead to forgive yourself if you miss a day, because what can happen is we miss a day, we beat ourselves up, and then we end up missing a week and a month, and then we just I'm useless, I can't do this. And so instead of making it into a bigger deal, like I missed today, so then you just start tomorrow and make it less of a deal. So those are just a couple practical strategies. And then certainly if the temperature taking is like a really big deal, you could consider investing in something like the Temp Drop.
Yeah.
So we talked about some of these different apps in class, and we talked about the differences. But when you're moving towards simply collecting the temperature data for the purpose of confirming ovulation, some of these devices can make it easier, especially if it's hard, so that at least you're getting the temperature collection and all you are responsible for is noting your mucus.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I would like to ask one question, because I don't think we talked about it in class at all. But I've heard of some people who actually take their temperature vaginally, but like I've thought about that. I think that would be sometimes helpful for me, because when I'm like barely waking up and I like poke the thermometer in my mouth and I can hold it there for 10 minutes, sometimes I'll kind of fall back asleep and my mouth will open, and then like it doesn't actually get the warming effect.
Yes.
And you can kind of see that on the chart that you've got pulled up here. That probably is what happened on those days that it was down like the very bottom of the 97.
Well, yes.
So I was having some drooling sleeping while I was warming up my temperature, and so I was just wondering, is that something that is literally just as simple as poking a thermometer in your vagina? Or is there like
yes,
a different technique to it? Okay.
So there are three, the kind of top three ways that you can do the temperature. So most of my clients will do orally, some will do vaginally, some will do underarm. And so, I mean, the only difference really is vaginally, the temperature may be slightly warmer because it's internal compared to oral. And then the axillaries, so under the arm, could be like slightly cooler. So if you change mid chart, you may just want to make a note to say checking vaginally now. So certainly there's benefits from vaginal checking. So some women, especially if they're having issues, like you said, with keeping the mouth closed and things like that, the vaginal temping can be more consistent. So you literally just put it in there, put the legs together.
Yeah. Okay.
And wait 10 minutes and yeah.
Yeah, I might try that and see. And that might give me, because one of the things that I was having a problem with at the beginning that the warming of the temperature sort of helped a little bit with was the really, really low temperatures, like down in 96 to 97 instead of 97 to 98. I bet taking my temperature vaginally would help get that evened out even more, and really tell me if I have low temperatures or not.
Yeah, definitely. So. Well, and so as we bring our session to a close, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your experience. I was telling you before we hit record that I love doing these episodes, and I know that my clients really love them too. And that's why I keep doing them. It's just so, for me, it's just a really, I suppose, just a passion of mine to continue to give this space for us to just share our experiences, like as women, our experiences with birth control, our experiences adjusting to fertility awareness. And because obviously that conversation doesn't happen in a lot of places.
Oh, yeah.
So with that in mind, for the listener who's kind of considering fertility awareness or even considering jumping in and taking the Fam Live class, what, if anything, would you want her to know?
Just that it really is helpful. I absolutely love knowing like how my body works, because that's not something that you learn in like school or from your doctor. That's not something that they bother teaching you. So it's really nice knowing like, this is what's happening in my body right now. This is what hormones are going on. But also like I said in my introduction, I was trying to quote unquote chart for a decade before I took your class. And I was not like, it didn't feel like it was helpful other than knowing when I had already ovulated, because sometimes my temperatures would raise, and then knowing about how long my periods were or my cycles were. But other than that, like I wasn't getting, the value of any of this information from the cervical mucus, because I didn't know how to chart the cervical mucus and all of that, And so I would say if you have the resources and the time and, the patience to really learn how to chart, it really is valuable. And it really is helpful to figure that out. And then, yeah, that would be the main takeaway, is just like actually knowing what you're doing, is really important. And it's not just for women who are like, well, my body's all screwed up from all, the fake hormones. Because like I said, I've never taken hormonal birth control, but there's still a lot of other sources of random hormones that mess with things, and, like stress. I mean, it changes things, and being able to track that is really important, I think.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, and I will see you again soon.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/367. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Brittany. I love these episodes because it gives you an insight into what's really going on behind the scenes, what it looks like when women are switching to fertility awareness, what the learning process looks like, and what some of the challenges are that we face when we're doing it. And certainly charting, looking at the menstrual cycle from this lens is a very different kind of activity, and it draws our attention to different kinds of things. And for most women who start charting, if you see certain cycle abnormalities or irregularities, it's often the motivation that we need to really make those changes that are going to make the biggest difference. And so what I love about charting is that I don't necessarily have to be there telling you, do this thing and do that thing and do this thing. Although I do provide suggestions, of course, and recommendations to my clients. But ultimately, the cycle is what we follow. And the cycle is what lets us know if we're on the right track. So if we make some changes and you actually see some positive improvements, then we know that we're on the right track. And whereas if we do make some changes and we're not really seeing the results we're looking for, then it's telling us that we really need to keep looking to figure out what it is that is the biggest factor to those cycle irregularities. And it's that sensitive. This feedback mechanism of our menstrual cycle as a vital sign, it is that sensitive and it is that reliable, and it is in many ways that straightforward. So if you are, a newer listener to the podcast, you've just dove into the world of fertility awareness and you're coming down the rabbit hole with me, I do hope that you enjoy these episodes to really give you that sense of what this really looks like in the real world. And so with that in mind, I hope you have a wonderful weekend, whenever you're tuning into the show. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.